And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this.JavaScript State of Frameworks. Very excited today to have a bunch of awesome people talking about the state of their framework or library. It's pretty exciting because it's February 12th, which means it's our first This.JavaScript Frameworks edition, Frameworks and Libraries edition of the year. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly. There we go. Everybody should be able to see that. All right. Now, so today, my name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyLeet. I'm the founder of a company called This. I'm also on the RxJS core team and a Google developer expert, as well as a ton of other different things. With me as well, we have a special invited expert, Bonnie Brennan, who is also a Google developer expert, and she's also the a panelist on Angular Air, as well as organizer of NG Houston. So thank you for joining us, Bonnie, as well.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, today we are going to have quite a few folks giving us state of update on their frameworks and libraries. There is a live chat, so if you're currently watching, you can go ahead and ask questions. We will be asking questions to the different speakers afterwards, so feel free to queue them up and everything like that. You can also follow us on Twitter at this.media, and we will answer questions there too. So RxJS will be updated by Ben Lesh. Evan Yu, the creator of Vue.js, will be giving us an update on Vue. Justin Fagnani will be talking about Polymer and web components. Kenneth Larsen will be talking about Ember. Jason Miller will be talking about Preact. Stephen Fluin will be talking about Angular. Michael Dawson will be talking about Node, and then Michael Jackson will be talking about React. Few updates. So This.JavaScript is put on by a company called This.media, and we have a lot of amazing events and exciting things happening. So this year we do have a focus on performance. So our first state of performance is going to be March 6th. So feel free to register for that. Performance is a really big topic, so we're definitely going to be talking about a wide variety of things. Then we also have one of our other brands called Modern Web. We're bringing Modern Web online. Currently, we do them in the Bay Area and Raleigh, North Carolina. But these are going to be online going forward as well. So folks like Ben Morse from the AMP team will be giving a little update and talking about AMP. We'll have Ori Goldstein talking about GraphQL as well. And then we'll have Katerina, who is on the This.Labs team, giving us a talk as well. So very excited about those things. If you like podcasts, we just released a few different podcasts. So we just released a podcast about GraphQL, also one about AMP, and we also did one about browser standards. So definitely check out Modern Web Podcast if you care about modern technologies. So again, we'll be doing updates for Angular, Node, Preact, React, RxJS, Ember, Vue, and Polymer and web components. I believe that's everybody. And then we will be going into discussion of future frameworks and different libraries. So with that being said, I wanted to go ahead and kick it off. And let's see, we will have... Evan, did we say you were going to go first? I believe we did, correct? Okay.
Yes.
Evan Yu is the creator of Vue.js, and he'll be giving us a quick update on the state of Vue.
Cool. Thanks, Tracy. Let me share my screen. Everybody can see it?
Yep.
Yes? Great. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So for Vue, one of the biggest things that we just did regarding the framework itself is we adopted an RFC process, so that this is modeled after the examples after Ember, Rust, React, which have similar processes. And so we'll be using the process to land substantial changes into Vue in the future. And this is critical for our upcoming 3.0 release as well, because most of the breaking changes that we plan to do in 3.0 will all go through this process. So if anyone is currently on a Vue 2.x application and will be wondering how 3.0 will affect your application, you should probably keep an eye on our RFC repo, because most of the breaking changes will be discussed there. And we just released a new minor release for the 2.x, which is 2.6. In it, we shipped a new slot syntax. The new syntax addresses a few problems of the legacy syntax, but is actually fully backwards compatible, which is why we were able to ship it in a minor release. So the old syntax still works, but you can choose when to migrate to the new syntax when you see fit. And this is the new syntax that we will use in 3.0. Along with the new syntax, actually, there are a few performance improvements underneath, which ensures that when you have parent components that are passing slots to the child components, our change detection now is more accurate, so that in certain cases, it is able to only update the parent component without forcing the child component to update. We also improved async error handling. So if you use an async function for your lifecycle hooks in your components, any errors captured during that async whole async process will be captured by Vue's error handling mechanism, so that you can decide to report them to a service or decide to display alternative content to tell the user about it. We also improved the compiler error messages. So when you make a syntax error, the error message now just gives you a code frame pointing to exactly where you made the mistake. We also introduced built-in data prefetch support during server-side rendering. So this is essentially a hook that allows any component, not just at the route level, any component down the tree to prefetch data on the server during server-side rendering. And the rendering process will essentially just wait until the data is fetched before calling the callback or resolving the render promise. So this kind of decouples all the data prefetching during server-side rendering from the router. So it's no longer router dependent. You can just do it anywhere in your application, which just makes it a lot simpler. So the official Vue Apollo integration and the Nux.js framework are both using this as the lower level mechanism to greatly simplify their API. So a lot of you know that 3.0 is currently under development. We briefly, I've made a few presentations last year about some of the things we plan to do. So I'll just do a brief recap of what we plan, what we plan to do. We're actually currently working on. Major goals of the 3.0 update. Some of these are self-evident. We want to make it faster, make it smaller. This is, something that we always are trying to do. And doing a major release is a good opportunity to sort of take more, a good opportunity to redesign a few things so that we can make fundamental changes instead of just incrementally make it smaller, right? And we also want to make the code base itself more maintainable. And a major release is also a good opportunity for introducing new capabilities, because we are rewriting most of the code base. In terms of making it faster, we're rewriting the virtual DOM implementation. We're improving the compiler architecture for more compile time optimizations. So the interesting thing about having a template layer on top of the virtual DOM is a lot of the hints. There are a lot of hints that you can give to a virtual DOM different algorithm to make it faster. So, and a lot of these hints can be statically analyzed when you're compiling a template. So we're taking more advantage of that, so that we're doing more of this kind of, it's kind of like ahead of time optimizations, because you essentially do this at compile time to gather hints about the runtime behavior. And then you leave these hints so that your runtime can take advantage of that and skip a lot of unnecessary work. We also are switching our change detection mechanism from ES5 getters and setters to ES6 proxies. Proxies gives us better startup performance, less memory usage, and based on our current benchmarking, and also gives us complete language coverage. So there are a lot of edge cases, well, a few edge cases in the current ES5 getter and setter based implementation. For example, you cannot actually detect when a new property is added to an object in ES5, but proxies can. So that gives us less edge cases to worry about. So this is just some very early stage prototypes and numbers and we're seeing really great improvements, more than double the speed and less than half the memory usage. But this is just one single benchmark. So, but we're very optimistic that we'll see similar improvements in the overall across the board improvements. Make it smaller, tree shaking friendly top level API and compiler outputs. Currently, the Vue runtime is just one big global object, right? It contains every API that we ship in the runtime. But in 3.0, if you're using a smart enough bundler that has tree shaking capabilities, you just import the API you need, and those that are not actually used can get tree shaking. The compiler output actually does that too. So if the compiler if you actually make use of a feature that requires a certain helper, the compiler output will import it. But if you don't use any of those features, the output will not import anything. And so that gives you a smaller bundle size. The baseline runtime size will be around 10 KB gzip. So that's a great improvement over our current, a bit over 20K right now. So we're aiming to shave across approximately half the size for the baseline. Make it more maintainable. So we're switching from Flow to TypeScript. It seems like a fashionable thing to do these days. Well, we've been using Flow for quite a long time. Most of the reason for switching to TypeScript is just the tooling and the ecosystem has just improved so much over time. There's a substantial difference between the two ecosystems now, and also that makes it easier for us to maintain typings for our TypeScript users. We're also refactoring the internals into the couple internal packages so that each package will have its own set of internal APIs and test suites. So it's easy for us to delegate to team members to maintain, to essentially own a piece of the code. Right now, the 2.x code base is sort of like a lot of interweaving concerns. So when you change one thing, you kind of have to know the whole picture to be able to make sure you don't step on other parts of toes. So we also want to write better documentation for the internal architecture. So to lower the barrier for contribution, right? We want more people to be able to contribute the code, but just jumping into a big code base with a bit of history, it's really hard to just understand what is going on without some sort of guidance, someone just helping you through understanding the code base first. And want to actually write something so that anyone can just read that and understand the code base better to be able to actually confidently make changes. The compiler architecture, we talked about a bit before. Essentially, we're trying to make it more like Babel so that each optimization, each template syntax feature gets to decouple into its own plugin sort of thing, which also makes it easier for us to for people to contribute and understand. Custom renderer APIs. So all of these codes shown here are just tentative. They're not final, may change, may just work the way it looks right now. Custom renderer API is just the first class API to create custom renderers that can target anything. You can use this for testing purposes. You can render to a terminal, canvas, anything. So Vue 2.x already has similar capabilities. It's just not exposed as an actual API. So a lot of these current render to native solutions based on Vue, for example, native script, weeks, they all pretty much have to fork Vue to some extent in order to plug in their own platforms. But with 3.0, this will be just the first class API. So you can use the Vue core runtime as a dependency, and you don't have to make your own patches. You can just update your upstream dependency and you'll get all the fixes. Exposed reactivity API. So the new proxy-based API is actually self-contained enough that we can expose it as a standalone utility. This actually will be its own package, but it's also exposed in the main Vue package as well. So you'll be able to create your own observable values and react to them. Improved TypeScript support. This is part of switching to TypeScript makes this a lot easier for us. Right now, we are using Flow for the 2.0 code base and have to separately maintain a set of DTS files. but after switching to TypeScript, this can mostly just be auto-generated. This looks a lot like React, but you don't have to use this if you don't like it. If you like it, you sure can. We're also exploring a lot of things the React community has been coming up with, right? Hooks is really cool. We don't think the way React hooks currently works will fit into Vue very well, but it really shows a lot of potential in terms of using functions as a composition mechanism that's just great for reusing logic, right? It's objectively better than mixins, of course. So hopefully we'll come up with something that will fit into the idiomatic Vue usage, but still sort of offers some of the benefits that hooks offers to replace mixins at least. So time slicing, we actually got time slicing working in the prototype to some extent, but obviously there's a lot of rough edges to work through. We're still exploring that. We want to apply that to server-side hydration as well. So when you have a server-side rendered app, right? We don't want the client to have to spend a lot of time hydrating the page before the user can interact with some of the elements. So we want to be able to break that process up as well. So that's pretty much it. And we'll talk about just final thing is our 3.0 rollout process. All breaking changes will go through the RFC. So if you're concerned about what's going to break in 3.0, just keep an eye on our RFCs. Most compatible changes, we'll actually try to land it in 2.x first. So you can start using those. And when 3.0 lands, it should just work the same way. Documentation will receive a major overhaul because of all the changes we're planning to land for 3.0. We'll also take that opportunity to restructure a few things, just improve here and there. And migration tools, there will be guides, code mods, and compatibility adapters. Most likely 3.0 will have a dedicated compatibility build that will be largely compatible with 2.x. With minimal changes required. We can't really guarantee 100% compatibility, but we'll try our best. And that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evan. That was really wonderful. You can follow Evan on Twitter at YouYuXi, if I said that right. That's YOUYUXI. And I'm going to pass it off to Bonnie to ask the first question.
Yeah, I had a lot of I had a question, and then he kept talking, and I had another question, and then I was like, oh, that's cool. Oh, there's so many questions. So maybe the silliest one. We'll get this out of the way first. So Henry in the chat wanted to know, is that Evan? Which I thought was, so of course you are Evan, not just a Vue expert. You actually wrote Vue, right? You started it. I came from the Angular world, so I'm learning crossovers. So I think the main question I had, and I really want to get to Ben's questions because Ben had some really good questions that he was dropping in the chat, so I want answers to those. But yeah, I would ask, what were your biggest challenges in streamlining, trying to make it better and faster and not break everything? Did you have anything that jumped out as something really challenging for you to handle?
Well, the most challenging part is all of the edge cases that we've accumulated over the years, right? We have so many test cases of these edge cases where people just use the APIs in unexpected ways, or there are browser-related quirks that we have to watch out for. So during the rewrite, we have to first get the basic functionality working, then we have to backport all those tests. We have to port over all the tests, make sure we don't actually break all these edge cases. So that's a lot of work when you're doing rewrites, and that's actually a slow process we're still working on. That's probably the biggest challenge we have to it's just a lot of work. You have to just fix them one by one.
That's awesome. So can you say hi to Henry real quick, because you have fans in the chat?
Hi.
And then Tracy, do you want to ask what Ben had, or Ben? Ben,
you want to ask the question, or?
Oh yeah, I can ask. So I had two questions. One is you mentioned, obviously my ears perked up when you said you're adding the ability to emit observables, and I'm presuming they're not RxJS observables, but what shape are they? Are you trying to go for like the kind of what was in the proposal, or are they a different sort of observable?
Oh, they're definitely not the same as RxJS observables. They're just objects that we provide you a mechanism to observe the mutations on them. So they're not streams. They're just values.
Those aren't observables, dang it.
You can say that. Well, yeah, but just they're used differently. They're just
Fight. I'm kidding.
You have
That's
mutable
fine.
values, and you have callbacks that will just do whatever you want to do when they change. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll have to dig into that. And then the other question I had was, you touched briefly on looking into the virtual, like you're rewriting the virtual DOM implementation. I was wondering if you at all looked at anything that existed in like Preact, like trying to use bits and pieces of that, because it's fairly small, lightweight virtual.
Yeah, Preact is great. I think there are actually a lot of like Chinese like knockoffs. Like they just like take Preact code and like we have a 3 KB React alternative, which is quite funny. I mean, I read the code. I definitely learned a lot. But in our case, I mean, Preact is obviously modeled after React, and Vue, because our virtual DOM is actually compiled down from our template layer. So there are a lot of like internal differences that's not completely compatible, but we sure can learn a lot from these, existing implementations. We actually looked at Inferno as well, because Inferno obviously does a lot of in the performance optimization department, and we took some notes from there as well. Overall, it's the rewrite is. We're also aware of, like frameworks like Svelte or Angular Ivy, which are trying to just like take templates and directly compile them to minimal instruction sets, which are really inspirational. But for us, because we have to maintain some sort of compatibility between 2 and 3, virtual DOM is a must, because we actually allow users to skip templates and drop down into the render function layer directly. So for us, it's we can't really go the full like compile into instruction route, because that would break the usage of render functions. But we are trying to sort of take the middle path where we have a virtual DOM runtime, but we also take a lot of hints from what we can gather from the static templates to just make the runtime run faster.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan. That was super amazing. Again, feel free to post more questions in chat if you like. You can follow Evan on Twitter. You can ask him all the questions you like as well. I don't know what your turnaround time is, Evan. Do you have like a specific SLA? I'm kidding. I'm teasing. So next up, and by the way, my comment about fighting, obviously a joke. The greatest part about this.JavaScript is the idea that everybody gets to come together. We're all working together. It's just JavaScript. Everyone is just, building and taking ideas. So next up, I'm super excited to hear from Michael Jackson, who will be giving us an update on React. So Michael, I'll let you take it away.
Hey, thanks for having me on the podcast, Tracy. I was going to give an update on React, but Evan's presentation was so good, I think I'm just going to use Vue from here on out, so we can just skip me.
Lovely. So, but router.
Yeah, no, I mean it was great. I mean he's got. I mean that Vue code looks very similar to some of the stuff we're doing. It's pretty awesome. The mixing of ideas. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so so let's see. So lately in React, I don't have any slides, but I just would like to try to kind of be quick because I want to give a lot of other people some time. Code splitting is now built into the framework. If you haven't been code splitting your apps, this is a great opportunity. Basically, code splitting is the idea that instead of delivering one large bundle to your users, you just give them the main bundle, and then you can sort of load the other ones, after they've already seen something and after they're already able to interact with the page. So you can load other bundles and defer that. So React.lazy and React.suspense are the mechanisms by which you do that. There's more about that in the React docs. So that's kind of cool. That was in the 16.6 release. The latest and greatest hotness in React land is hooks. So hooks are this idea that you can hook into the underlying React infrastructure with these little functions. And so you have different hooks for using different features of React. You have a use state hook, use context for using the context feature of React, use refs for using persistent values between render calls, use effect for having side effects or doing things like, doing like non-pure things in these pure functions, setting up timers, having side effects, imperative DOM mutations, things like that. So there are lots and lots of different hooks. I think there are probably like 7 or 8 of them. I've only personally played around with like 5 or 6 of them, but there are a few others that there's one I think called use layout effect. So anyway, there's lots of docs about that, but those are actually stable now. So those were released in React 16.8. So you can use all of that. My business partner and I, Ryan Florence, we're actually going to be doing a tour all about React hooks. So if you want to know more about that, just visit reacttraining.com. We've announced a bunch of upcoming tour dates, and we'd love to tell you more about that. Also, I'm going to post some links, if that's okay, Tracy. I'm going to post some links to some talks where people can learn more about this. So Dan Abramov and Ryan Florence gave some really good talks about hooks at ReactConf in October, I think it was. So that's stuff that is already released, already shipped. You can use that today. Upcoming stuff, React concurrent mode. So concurrent mode is actually really, it's an interesting idea. It's basically the idea that React has the ability to prioritize certain types of work above other certain types of work. So for example, any type of user interaction like a key press or a scroll or something like that, React can actually prioritize that work above, rendering some view, and it can prioritize that work on the main thread. So some experiments were done with, taking React and using worker threads, to sort of delegate some of the work. I think those experiments kind of were, we decided to kind of not go that route. And so concurrent mode is the new thing. That should hopefully be landing later this year. I'm going to post a link to Andrew Clark's talk about concurrent mode, where you can learn a lot more about that. Concurrent mode also is going to really enhance the suspense stuff, because right now, with the suspense mode that I was talking about earlier with the code splitting, basically if you're loading a bundle, all you're going to get now is like a spinner, and you have like a timeout. But what concurrent mode is actually going to give you is the ability to wait for that work to happen, so to speak. So anyway, I'm gonna link to Andrew's talk so you can find out more about that. Also later this year, something that is going to land is support for data fetching inside Suspense. So right now, Suspense supports code loading, code splitting, but data fetching is the thing. Is basically the idea is that you can wait for some asynchronous some IO to happen before you actually render a tree. And so that's going to be happening later this year. One module, I'll link to it, that you can explore to find out more about how that's going to work, is the React cache module, where the React team themselves implemented a simple cache module that follows this API that they're using for resolving asynchronous data fetches. And so that's kind of the roadmap for this year as far as React Core. There's also some cool work that's going on ReactJS.org. So ReactJS.org is being translated into many, many languages. This is actually just fairly recent, like in the last couple of weeks. The community has come together and started translating ReactJS.org into lots and lots of languages. There are currently, I think, 16 or 17 different repos. French, Spanish, Japanese, Indonesian, German, Portuguese, Russian, Polish, Korean, Azerbaijani, Armenian, Dutch, traditional and simplified Chinese, Arabic, Persian, Bulgarian, Hebrew. And for those of you who like to spell the word color with a U, we have UK English as well in there. So you've got American English and UK English.
And Canadian.
Anyway, we've got lots and lots of different translations going on. So if you're a person who speaks a different language, you want to get involved in that stuff, just head over to the github.com/ReactJS, and you'll find all those repos there, and you can help translate the React docs into different languages. And so that is my 5-minute summary about what's going on in React land.
Cool. Thank you so much, Michael. That was
yeah. I'll post those links, and you can share those as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's super awesome. So pass it off to Bonnie for any questions, and panelists as well if you have any questions for Michael.
I just have a quick question. Sorry, my clock keeps chiming. Michael, you're such a fun person. So what's your calendar look like for 2019? Where are you going to be? Do you have any conferences planned that haven't come up yet?
Yeah. So my calendar is, if you go to reacttraining.com, you'll see where I'm going to be in. We're doing a workshops tour. So we're actually going to hit up every single major metropolitan area in the U.S. We're going to be in Washington, D.C., New York, Boston. We're going to be down in Dallas, in San Diego, Seattle, Denver, a couple of other places at least. So definitely check out that schedule if you want to come to one of our workshops. I'm also going to probably be at React Loop later this year in Chicago, which is a conference that they haven't really talked about a lot yet. So hush, I probably shouldn't tell you about that. But anyway,
we won't tell anybody. Don't worry.
Yeah, really excited to be at that one. The organizers of that one are like super cool, and so I love going to Chicago, especially in the summertime. I would not recommend going to Chicago right now, but that conference is going to be in June, so it'll be nice.
Or really hot.
Yeah. Oh, I'm also going to be at JSConf, because I live in Carlsbad, California, and JSConf is coming to Carlsbad. It's going to be like in my backyard. It's going to be amazing.
Well, awesome. So everyone, you can also follow Michael on Twitter at mjackson. Probably don't search Michael Jackson because you'll find.
Yeah, no, you won't find me
there. So next up, I wanted to go ahead and bring it up to Michael Dawson, who is the TSC co-chair for Node.js, and he's going to give us a quick update on State of Node.
Thanks. I'll just start by sharing my screen here. And so as Tracy said, I'm going to give you a quick update on the state of Node.js. If you don't know me, I'm one of the collaborators in the Node.js community, currently on the technical steering committee and acting as the TSC chair. I also get to work with lots of the different working groups and with some great teams within IBM who are working on our Node.js efforts as well. Just start out a little bit on releases and upcoming releases. So we have our regular release cadence, and what that means is that in April we're going to have some transitions. So the first one is that 6.x is going to go end of life. So if you're not already planning your move and already probably in transition from moving off of 6.x to either the 8.x or 10.x releases, you should really get on top of that because there's not a lot of time left. Looking at the active LTS releases going forward, so Node 8.x is has been in service for a while. One of the things I should point out on that front is that we did have to transition from the active maintenance to an early maintenance to the made an early switch to the maintenance versus active updates at the end of this year. All that really means is that we're not going to be backporting as many fixes and changes. It'll really be focused on critical fixes and security fixes that go into 8.x. Node 10.x came out in October, and as we mentioned in the last update, it had some significant performance improvements, new version of NPM, and some good features like HTTP2 and NAPI, which I'll talk a little bit about on the slides that follow. And of course, the other transition we'll get in April is that we're going to cut Node 12.x, and it will be the current release, but then transition to the next LTS in October. So if you want to potentially move to 12.x as your next jump from wherever you're on, that'll be a good opportunity to sort of test it out, give us good feedback, and help us make sure that it's ready for LTS when it hits October. In terms of the current release, that's 11.x. It has a newer version of V8. I think it may be version 7.1 now as opposed to 7.0. The other interesting thing, or one of the other interesting things that it has, is workers without a flag. So I'll talk about workers, but you used to need to be able to turn it on. The other thing it does have is a report functionality, which requires a flag, but is now new in 11. So looking back at some of the key features we got in 10, so NAPI, which is the Node API, is for building native add-ons, and it gives you a standard and ABI stable API that you can use to write those native add-ons instead of having to use the V8 API, which changes at a fairly good pace. You know, in the look to see what would be coming up for the next current, there was a number of modules, for example, that needed updates to be able to work with the new versions V8. So if you use NAPI, you avoid a lot of that work and really just need to write your application. You need to update your application less often, as well as you can even have binaries which will run against all of the LTS versions. In 10, it actually became stable earlier, but in 10 we now got to the point where we had it to be stable in 10, 8.x, and it's stock only experimental in 6.x, and that you get the same API, except that it's in the documentations it says it's stable. So when we hit April, it'll be stable in all of the LTS releases that are out there. The other thing we got in 10.x was HTTP2, which gives us a number of good new features like request response multiplexing, efficient compression, server push, and so forth. Another feature was OpenSSL 1.1, an upgrade to OpenSSL 1.1.0. We have actually recently landed 1.1 in master, and I'm hopeful that we'll get that back into 10. The one wrinkle is that TLS 1.3 actually from OpenSSL introduces some wrinkles, so we're not 100% sure we can get TLS 1.3 support back into 10.x, but that's still something that we're working on to see if we can. In terms of features that are in progress, workers, I'll talk about a bit more, but that's basically a feature that went in as an experimental in core, and if you've used workers in the browser, will look pretty familiar. Node report is a diagnostic feature that used to be available as an NPM, a native module, but that actually posed a number of challenges in terms of requiring compilers to compile it. And if you had your application in production and somebody asked you to install a new feature that required you to compile modules, that could often be difficult. So now the functionality is built into core, and I will talk a little bit more about that. ES6 modules work still goes on to come up with an ES6 module implementation that balances keeping existing implementations and existing users happy while providing something that's as ES6 compatible as possible. There has been continues to be experimentation in terms of core promise APIs. We have a few APIs that provide and return promises, really as an experiment to see how those are used, how they look, and you can take a look at that if you have a particular interest. And the final one I'll mention is async hooks, which is again a diagnostic feature where you can use that to keep track of what's going on async and be able to put together longer stack traces and that kind of stuff. So diving in a little bit more detail on one or two of the features, the first one I'll talk about is workers. So they are based on web workers. They're not exactly the same, but we haven't actually called out the differences in the documentation. I think that's something we're going to work on. As I mentioned, you don't need a flag to use in 11.7 or later. It is still experimental, but that's a reflection that the API hasn't actually changed that much for a while. Each thread is basically a separate JavaScript execution environment. You can exchange data between those environments through messaging. So by default, you'll get object cloning. So you'll get a copy of the object as you transfer it. You can also do handoff, where the object is transferred effectively from, say, your main thread to a worker thread. And in those cases, you can only access the object either from the main thread or from the worker thread, but not both at the same time. And then finally, you can use memory sharing, where you pass shared array buffers, and then you have to manage concurrency through atomics. Again, shared array buffers and atomics are not something specific to Node, so if you want to go read some more about those, you can read at those links that I provided. The one limitation today is you can't transfer, or one of the limitations today is you can't transfer handles, so socket handles and stuff like that. And then finally, there is some overhead. There still is overhead to starting, worker threads, even though it may be different or less than starting at processes. So reuse and pooling is still recommended. Just to look at the code to give you a little bit more concrete idea, and this shows a simple case. If you've used the child process, not the child process, the cluster functionality will look very familiar, where you can have a single JavaScript file that says, if I'm running as a main thread, this is the code that I want to run. If I'm running as a worker, I want to run this other thread. You don't necessarily have to do it that way, because when you actually spawn your worker, you'll see that in the line where we say new workers.worker __ file name, I just happen to be passing in the same file when I start the workers, but that's not required. I can actually pass in any JavaScript function or file, so that I can just start up workers that don't necessarily have to have this as main thread. When the workers start up, there's a port where you can communicate back and forth. And if you've used them in the browser, again, they'll look very, very familiar. Report is the other one that I'm going to talk about. This is now integrated into core. You can basically get a diagnostic report by turning it on with experimental report and then setting the cases, whether you want to have it on a fatal error, on an exception, when you get a signal. And you can also do it programmatically through the process.report, get report, set diagnostics, and trigger report options. Unfortunately, I can't show a picture because my file embedding didn't quite work very well here. But it has a lot of very interesting information about your environment. So it includes things like your ulimits. It has GC information. It has stack traces. It has all sorts of information. So it's a really lightweight, easy to get, and easy to read JSON format. So it's a great addition as sort of a first step in your diagnostic investigation process. Just always like to stand back and say it's not strictly about features. There's lots of work going on in the Node community around all sorts of initiatives. So, we have teams, working groups, and strategic initiatives. One of the ones I'll call out is we started a package maintenance effort, sort of recognizing that there is a challenge in the community where we have a lot of modules that are really heavily dependent on. But the module maintainers, may have started them as a hobby, may have moved on to other things and don't have time to maintain them. And we sometimes have a mismatch between, the consumers who are hoping to get changes, updates, and fixes, and maintainers who really may not have time to do that anymore. And so we have a team that's spun up within the Node community to try and look at that problem, come up with ways we can help the module maintainers, including trying to figure out how consumers, including businesses and other people who use those modules, can help in the maintenance effort itself. So if you're interested, I think that's an interesting one to get involved in. A whole bunch of other efforts around security, diagnostics, automation, benchmarking, mentoring, really around building the safety net, growing involvement, getting better information so we can make better decisions, supporting our end users, and just making things, through automation and stuff easier for everybody. And I, of course, need to mention that, back in October, it was mentioned that we were working, that there was an initiative to bring the Node.js Foundation and the JavaScript Foundations together. That work's being carried out through what we call the Bootstrap Committee. It's open to anybody to participate. We've been working on a number of the key documents, including the cross-project councils, we're calling it, governance. That is the group that will include representations from all the member projects. And is responsible for a fair amount of the work within on the project side, not within the project side, but within the foundation side, working with the project, supporting the projects. There's work there in terms of how do projects join, how do they progress through the different stages. And so if you have an interest there, or potentially think that that the combined foundation would be a good home for your project, I'd really recommend you read some of the documents there. They're getting to the point where we think they're in a pretty good shape, and may resemble what they're going to look like in the end. So I'll just end up with so what's next? Again, it's what you make it. We really are looking for the people to come and meet us in GitHub and to help make Node, continue to help make Node great.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was awesome. I also do community relations for Node.js on behalf of the Node Foundation. So it's just really amazing to see all the amazing work that's happening in the community side and also on the foundation side come together. Really,
there's just so much going on. It's great.
Yes. And Michael, you're always everywhere, every single working group meeting. So Node actually is one of the most interesting open source projects to me because, you know, it's not just, hey, core team meeting, but there's like, you know, working group here. There's a mentorship working group. I don't know if you call it working group, but there's the user feedback initiative. There's the modules one. There's the this one. So when I first started working on Node stuff, I was like, whoa, I just have 20 hours of meetings now on my calendar.
There's a very strong focus on sort of decentralization, right? It's not that the technical steering committee gets together and makes all the decisions. It's more that, you know, we empower each of the people, you know, the people who are interested in a particular area to work on that area. And the technical steering committee is really there to help support them, or if people can't come to consensus, maybe to engage in the conversation. But yeah, as much as possible, we have the different groups work on their own.
Yeah, so if anybody's interested in anything related to Node and you're a beginner or anything, I mean, just really, and I think we say this for all open source projects, but especially for Node, you have so many sort of like official groups and meetings you can just start listening in on and attending. So really encourage you to get involved there.
Yeah, they're all open. So, you know, if you're interested, you can watch, or you can even just show up and join the meeting. You know, we're always looking to have new people get involved.
Yes.
Hey, Michael, you should turn off your screen share so we can see you.
Okay.
And I have one quick question. Do we have time, Tracy?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so Michael, I went to stalk you on Twitter, and you actually have some really great stuff on Twitter, but it was hard to find you because you're MH Dawson 1. Luckily, Tracy tagged you, so I was able to find you.
Yeah.
Now, what's the H?
It's Hilton. That's my middle name.
Ooh.
I was going to guess Henry, and we have a Henry
no.
watching on the chat, so, but Hilton. So, okay, well, I had to know now. So, MH Dawson 1 on Twitter. You actually share some really great information and retweets and links on there. So,
yeah, there's a lot of Michael Dawsons. Even at IBM, I think there's 5 of them. So that was M. Dawson wouldn't have been unique enough.
That is amazing. All right. Well, thank you again, Michael, so much. And thank you for being such an amazing person in the Node community. So next up, we will have Stephen Fluin speak about the state of Angular.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. For those of you who don't know me, Stephen Fluin, I lead developer relations for the Angular team. So I'm going to keep today's update really, really short, really, really sweet. Just try and cover some of the kind of cool things that are going on. We did a blog post last week with a lot of additional details if you're interested. Or if you want to find out more, you can always reach out to any of us on the team. So I always like to start with kind of thinking about Angular from the perspective of who we're trying to be from the kind of value vision of kind of what do we value. So we always value apps that users love to use, apps that developers love to build, and a community where everyone feels welcome. And we really hope that basically everything we do reflects well on all of these values. So let's talk a little bit about Angular today. So right now, most people are probably using version 7, which is our most recent release that came out in fall of last year. And we're really helping developers and focusing on each of these major releases on a few different things. We want to help developers move faster with a set of integrated tools. We want to help developers scale better with an ecosystem, and we want to help developers reach further by partnering and building out a really nice kind of end-to-end story between the server, between the client, between mobile, desktop, all those sorts of things. One thing I want to give a little bit of an update on, because we get a lot of questions around this, is our 6-month release cycle. We're really, if you've ever heard the term "it's just Angular," that is a big focus for us because even though we do put some minor breaking changes into each of the major releases, we've been doing this for 2.5 years now, and from the statistics that we're seeing, most Angular apps that people are working on are on the latest release, and so every release that we've done so far has gotten easier and easier to update. The anecdotal data that I've seen is that the first update from version 2 to 4 ended up taking a few days, and now with the version 7 update, where we're down to even as little as a few hours. And this is actually a really big deal for us because this is something that we're trying to change kind of across the ecosystem, which is to invert how both Angular works with its dependencies, and we hope this goes beyond just Angular. And I think kind of Evan pointed at a couple of things that they're doing in this realm. If you look at the traditional JavaScript model, you've got kind of a few steps that you take when you interact with your dependencies. First, when you want to embed a new library or pull in a new dependency, you're going to pull up their GitHub repository. You're going to look at their readme.md file, and you're going to follow the 12 steps to install and set those things up. And then every X days, this is different for everybody. I know there's a few tools out there that will actually do this for you automatically, where every time your dependency updates, it'll automatically send a PR to your repo, which is really cool. But oftentimes, not all projects follow semantic versioning, and even if you do follow semantic versioning, oftentimes you want the latest and greatest fixes from a major release that might have some breaking changes. And so you kind of throw this all at NPM and then fix whatever broke. And this isn't really a great model for working. And so we're really trying to push hard to fix this. And so if you look at the last couple major releases, a couple of the commands that we shipped are ng add and ng update as part of our CLI, which really are trying to push the world into a new model where from the first standpoint, when you first start touching a dependency, we want dependencies to be responsible for installing themselves. So if you're shipping a component library, you're shipping any sort of tooling, when you install that tool, it should actually integrate itself into your project. So we don't want people to have to go and do those 12 steps of a README file to get started in a sane way with a new dependency. The other thing that we're doing with ng update, and really this is all based on open source schematics, which we hope a lot of people adopt, and we're seeing a lot of packages adopt, even a few outside of the Angular ecosystem, is the idea that dependencies should be responsible for keeping your application up to date. So we really want to push people into, if you're going to push breaking changes, if you have to rename a symbol, do that for the user, right? Take responsibility, understand how your dependence or how your library is being used, understand how people think about you, and then whenever possible, automate that or build tooling that helps people with code mods, TS-lint transforms, those sorts of things. So let's look forward a little bit to the future. So we just shipped a blog post, as I mentioned, that talks a little bit about version 8. So we're expecting version 8 to go RC here in basically Q2, so around April timeframe. And it's really focused a lot on quality of life improvements. So we're making some changes to the Angular router so that you can support lazy loading of Angular.js routes using $route if you're still using Angular.js and ng upgrade, which is a very commonly requested feature. And we heard from a lot of people on Twitter that they're really excited about this. We incorporated some community PRs around web workers to try and make bundling easier with our CLI. And we're pushing people into differentially loaded JS. So there's a technique where you can, depending on the attributes on your script tag, conditionally load modern JavaScript versus legacy JavaScript, depending on the support of the browser. And so we're starting to bake that in first. We already shipped this in 7.3 of our CLI as handling the polyfills. We want to bring that to your main bundle as well so that we can ship more modern JavaScript, which is going to save your users time, save them bandwidth. The other big thing that's coming in version 8 and what we're spending most of our time on right now is getting Ivy ready. As many people have asked us, when is Ivy going to be ready? So what we are planning on doing is we're planning on releasing Ivy as a opt-in preview in version 8. So you'll basically flip a switch, and then your application will be using Ivy by all the backwards compatibility that we've got. And the opt-in preview, obviously we're looking for a lot of different feedback. We want to know where we're breaking the ecosystem, where we're breaking your applications, where things are bigger, where things are slower, so we can go and track all those things down. But generally from our early tests, we're expecting people to be seeing code that's easier to debug at runtime. We're expecting rebuild times to be much, much faster because we have incremental rebuilds. We have more locality in our compiler, so you need less global knowledge. We're seeing payload sizes decrease again, especially for generated code. And then obviously all this is underpinned with great backwards compatibility because we're going to have the opt-in preview as part of 8. And then once that is ready in the next major, we're going to just flip the switch for everybody. So everyone will be able to take advantage of Ivy. And just because we know that we have to get the entire ecosystem there without really any work on their part, for most people, we were very confident that we're going to be able to do this. And after that, that really unlocks a whole new universe of innovation and ideas. So one of the projects that Vikram from our team, for example, is working on is a way of combining server-side rendering with component-level hydration. So imagine if you just have a static HTML page, that as soon as a user tries to interact with a piece of that content or tries to perform an interaction, like a button click or a hover event, anything that you choose, we can then hydrate just that component shallowly. So there's some really, really cool ideas that we're experimenting with, and all of these are kind of unblocked with Ivy. And we're also really excited to see what the community comes up with once Ivy is available for everyone. We have a survey going on right now. If you're used to the state of the Octoverse surveys or a lot of the JavaScript surveys, this one is very, very short. It should take you less than a minute, but we love to hear people's feedback. If you're interested, so bit.ly Angular Survey 2019. And that was it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. I love the surveys. I don't know if I know Node is going to have their survey at some point in time coming up. And then does React do a survey, Michael? I'm not sure. But anyways, either way. So check out the Node survey too. Check out the Angular survey. I saw it posted on angular.io, so definitely have taken mine. And so next up, we will have Bonnie. Do you have any specific questions?
I have questions. I always have questions, Tracy.
Okay.
Stephen, how did you feel when Evan said that Angular Ivy was inspiring?
That feels great, because I think it always goes in every direction, right? Like we're always trying to learn from the entire industry. We're trying to learn from the ecosystem. I think events like this really show that we share a lot of values. We really want to make things better for developers. And whenever we can learn from each other and help all of our communities, that's a really, really good thing.
I think so too. I love it.
Yes, I especially love how Angular always talks about community, and making everyone feel inclusive. And I know all the other communities here feel the same way, but I love that you put that front and center every time you talk about Angular. So next up, we will go ahead and have Ben. So Ben is the author of RxJS 5 and above, and he's also on the Angular core team. And Ben, I'll just go ahead and have you give an update on the state of RxJS.
Yeah, I was working on Ivy right now, actually. But yeah, I'm one of the authors. There's lots of other contributors. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
Oh man, you got slides for us?
Not slides, but I do have stuff I want to share. So, all right, hopefully everybody can see that.
Yeah.
Recently, we had the 6.4 release of RxJS, and there was a lot of various bug fixes in here. A good chunk of the bug fixes were type changes. And the reason I bring this up is that it's the first time. So all of RxJS 6 has always been in TypeScript, targeting TypeScript 2.8 and higher. But this is the first time we actually used a TypeScript 2.8 feature. So I know that there was a few people that were still using TypeScript 2.7, and we might have broken you, but we've always been targeting 2.8. So that's just a heads up for some people. I'm sure they probably already ran into this a week ago if they tried to update and they just needed to upgrade TypeScript. But in particular, the features that were added, there's for a long time, people have been asking for a take while inclusive. And what this means is before you would just take while, and there was this check that you would run that you passed as a filter, and it would say take while, basically this filter is true, and as soon as the filter is false, just complete, and it wouldn't give you that last value. So now there's like a Boolean that you can say, give me that last value. That's something that people have been asking for a while. Just other than that, it's just minor fixes. The other thing that a lot of people have been asking for is the community was really split on share replay and how it should behave. This adds like a ref counting feature. So for those people that aren't familiar or that are familiar, that would probably be the only people that would care about this. But share replay had this behavior where everyone could unsubscribe from it, but the source subscription would keep going because it wanted to get that data and cache it as kind of like an eager mechanism. And this gives the ability to opt out of that. So if everyone unsubscribes, then it will unsubscribe from the source. Again, you have to opt out of that behavior. But let's see, the TypeScript feature that we used that was from TypeScript 2.8 allowed something really, really good. There's a problem that people were having if they were using like Redux Observable or Redux or the other one is NGRX effects. It's very similar, where they would have this situation where they would have a concat map that returned two different types of observables. So in this case, I've got this thing and I'm saying, give me a random number. And if the random number is greater than 0.5, then return an observable of a number. Otherwise, return an observable of a string. And TypeScript pukes on it. TypeScript did not like that. And this is against RxJS 6.3. We fixed that in RxJS 6.4. So if I install RxJS 6.4, you'll see the problem goes away and I get the proper type out of here. And what needed to be done was we actually used a feature from TypeScript 2.8, which was the conditional types. And a good friend of mine here on the Angular team, Alex Rickabaugh, came up with this pattern that's kind of interesting for people that use TypeScript. What we're saying is, here's this type, and you give it something that's in the generic. So this could be in anything, but if it happens to be an observable input, we get the generic out of the observable input and we return it. So it's a way to kind of pull a generic type out of this generic type. And so what that means is we can use it in various spots where we're saying, hey, if you're going to return to me some observable input, I need to figure out what type of observable input you've returned to me, and then use that in my returned observable type. So that's what enables this nice typing, and it's a big improvement. Out of all this, though, I think that the lesson that the core team learned was that we're probably going to end up doing RxJS 7 will be a lot of removing deprecated APIs and just updating the types to support TypeScript 3.0 and higher. And a lot of this is because it puts us in a good position to move over to the smaller version of TypeScript. That there's been 3 prototypes I've put together for that. And because the APIs, some of the APIs do need to change in order to get RxJS to be a lot smaller. So to get the smaller version of RxJS will probably be Rx8, and Rx7 will be, here's a bunch of, we're removing deprecations and some breaking changes in the typings in order to get types better and type inference a lot better for people, because well over, I would say 60% of our users are using TypeScript. So it's important that we get that right. And it's really hard to get TypeScript right in a functional library like this. So there's been a lot of work put into it. We've got a few PRs that are sitting there blocked on trying to get update to TypeScript 3.0 and start on the latest version. But that's all the work that's coming up soon here for RxJS. So I don't want to stop screen sharing. Look, it's Tracy.
You're back. All right, so my mouse disappeared. Oh, connection is lost on my mouse. Well, there we go. All right, so I'm on the RxJS core team as well, so just letting you know, and this was actually very exciting for last year. We had a lot of new contributors who just started contributing to the docs. Then what happened after they started contributing to the docs is Ben was like, this is awesome. And now we actually have them contributing to core. And so there's a lot of, if you care about working on an open source project, RxJS team would be super happy to have you.
Oh God, I didn't even talk about the updates to the docs. We had a lot of amazing updates to the docs recently.
Tons of updates to the docs, yes.
I'm going to share one more time just to get that. So first off, you can go to RxJS.dev now.
We have the Stackblitz update too.
Oh, what's that?
The Stackblitz update too. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So there's quite a few things. You can get into the reference now. There's the actual operator decision tree, which a lot of people liked. So you can say, I have one existing observable, and let's see, I want to know how many values it emits, and then it tells you that you want to use count, and you can jump to that. The other thing that's interesting is now the examples, you can go and play with them in Stackblitz directly, which is pretty cool. And then the other thing that a lot of people haven't really, people have started noticing, and it's great, like you can go in and you can suggest edits to the docs just by clicking this button, and it'll take you to go actually file a PR against this, so you can update the documentation, which has been very, very helpful. And we've been getting more and more of those, which it's great because we don't always have time to go back and update some of the examples in particular or fix typos. So if you're in the docs and you see something like that, just click the little pencil. Those tend to get reviewed and merged pretty quickly. So that's it. That's the updates to the docs have been tremendous, and I'm really, really thankful for all the people that have helped us with that.
Cool, awesome. Bonnie, do you have any pressing questions?
Yes, I have one question. Okay, so when I was first learning RxJS, there was this one feature on the docs that had a really special place in my heart, the choose your own adventure feature. There was this little thing that was like, what do you want to do? And it would like lead you through this little adventure, and it was great, and it disappeared, and I heard it was back. Is it like officially back or maybe gonna be back? What's up with that?
Yeah, no, that was the first thing I showed you. That was if you go over on the left-hand side, there's an option, and it's got a little bit of a different feel to it because I think it's in material now, but yeah, that's in there.
I quick and I missed it, but I have to tell anyone beginning with RxJS, go find that because it's amazing, because it helped me a lot really when I was learning. It's fun. When can you have fun while you're learning?
Yeah, we probably need to make it more prominent, I think, but yeah, it's definitely back in the docs.
I love it. That makes me happy.
Great opportunity to submit a PR. Just make it front and center on this first page.
Right.
Okay, so next up, we are going to go ahead and have Jason give us an update on Preact. So you can follow Jason on Twitter @_developit, and he will not be playing the drums today, but we're looking forward to it.
Yes. All right, I have slides. They may have been finished 2 minutes ago. Let me just present. Oh, no. I should be much faster at this, given the amount of time I use slides for.
Time's slow when you're presenting on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. Window. There. Are they there?
Yes. Good to go.
Yay, it works. And apologies in advance. I have been sick for many weeks now. One day I'll figure out what it is. Okay, so I believe actually last time on State of Frameworks, Marvin gave kind of an overview of Preact X. And so this, for folks who haven't heard of it, this is sort of this crazy initiative that has been underway for a year to completely re-architect how Preact works. So not pulling over even a single character's worth of code from the existing code base. Trying to build on all the learnings we have and all the learnings we can glean from the various other players in this space, while still trying to maintain the exact same set of trade-offs that Preact has always attempted to make, which is favoring size first, followed by performance, and then trying to do things to make other features and characteristics of the library workable, but always subject to those two constraints. So a lot of people have been asking, why would we rewrite an existing popular JavaScript library? I actually think that Evan gave a really good description of why this is, and it's just to be able to give ourselves the opportunity to rethink things that have been taken for granted. And also, it was triggered by the existence of a React concept called fragments. We tried for a very long time to implement fragments in Preact and basically determined that it was fundamentally impossible, or if there was any half-measure solution that would work, it would be hideously expensive and large and break most of the value proposition of the library. So we decided to do a rewrite. This was around a year ago. We wanted to get a bunch of new features into the library, obviously starting with fragments. We wanted to get better compatibility with the React ecosystem, not just through Preact compat, which was gaining size. We wanted smaller size for the library at the same time for all of this, which is weird, but we figured might as well keep it as a goal. Better performance, and just to have less edge cases, so less cases where you could accidentally trigger suboptimal diffing or various things. So this it started out as me experimenting in a private repo to see if I hadn't written Preact and I was going to write Preact today, what would I build? I had a little bit of time before starting at Google, and this was one of the things that I messed around with. But I quickly stopped having time. And yeah, so I quickly stopped having time, but I opened up this private repo to a bunch of the collaborators who had been working on Preact core out in the open. And I am terrified of putting this slide up because I'm worried I've missed somebody's name. I really hope I haven't, or I've misspelled one of their GitHub IDs, trying to remember them from memory. What happened was that private repo kind of became the way that Preact was going to move forward. Everyone could kind of see the writing on the wall for Preact's existing diff implementation, for a reason I'll get into in a second. But we got all these people into the repo, and all of a sudden, you know, there's these streams of pull requests coming through, moving things forward while keeping the size down. And so there's a lot of what you see on the right here, this like steady march towards every feature being free or every feature being offset by another, you know, code golfing PR. Both of those are from Andre Wiggins, who is merciless with his code golfing. Yeah, so the features we got, the first one, everyone is screaming about hooks. Preact has hooks. We have actually multiple implementations of hooks at this point, like upwards of 5, but we are shipping just the one. Hooks, obviously, you know, it's been discussed in other talks here, but we wanted to bring this to Preact in a way that kind of felt logical. So in Preact, you'll actually import hooks from Preact/hooks. So you won't have any of the injection cost or wiring cost if you do not use hooks. And they're all fully independently implemented. So there's no meta-programming cost. If you import the useState hook, you get literally one function called useState, and its entire implementation is encapsulated in that function. If you don't import all the other hooks, you do not pay for any of them, as long as you have a bundler that is capable of decent tree shaking. So hooks are in. Fragments, obviously this was the reason why the rewrite started. Ironically, it took like 5 months to actually get around to getting this into the rewrite, because we were doing re-architecture stuff to make everything work. Fragments are essentially virtual DOM nodes that are not represented in the real DOM when it gets rendered. So they're sort of like document fragments, but they persist. So in Preact's new diff, this is possible. And the reason is because Preact used to diff all of the virtual DOM nodes against real DOM nodes. So anytime you performed an update, it would crawl both trees and apply the changes from the virtual DOM to the DOM. The huge, like, nuke the world rewrite in this Preact X repository was that we now diff, I've got a bug on my slides. We now diff the virtual DOM tree against the new copy of the virtual DOM tree as generated by render functions, and then we apply the changes to the real DOM. But in order to keep Preact as this, like, you know, it's the paradigm you're used to, but ridiculously small, we still do a single phase diff. So we still compare the trees at the same time as we are walking the real DOM tree. We're walking 2 trees at the same time, and then all the changes are synced out synchronously as we walk the tree. So still a single phase. And then another thing that we were trying to tackle with this was compatibility. So originally, this reimplementation started out under the exact same specifications as Preact core, so it had all the same objects and property names. And over time, we realized that because we had already reduced the size sufficiently, we could kind of walk back some of those things. And one of the most important ones is that the virtual DOM nodes in Preact have always been quite different than those found in React. They have different names, they have different shapes, they don't really work the same way. And we smooth over that in Preact compat with some crazy getter stuff. Ceviche, which is the code name for Preact X, we dropped all of that. And now virtual DOM nodes in Preact X are going to look exactly the same as they do in React. You may even be able to use React's create element as a, you know, and then like actually pass those V nodes over to Ceviche. Although I would not recommend doing that. Yeah, so net result of that is like you'll see often in libraries, if you use like the function as children pattern or any of its 5 names, looking at you, Michael Jackson. If you use that pattern, it's very common to like invoke props.children in a render method as a function. And that was always really hard for us to kind of patch into Preact via Preact compat. That's no longer required because that's just the shape of the object now. So, now that we had started down that path, we decided, okay, well, how far could we go to making Preact itself, without a compatibility shim, just work the same way? Obviously, the diff is still fundamentally different, but could we just make all the constraints the same, or like make the structures the same? So we had a create ref. This actually is in Preact version 8, which is already live. We had to create context, and the hydrate method, which is a slightly variant version on the render method that will like do checksums. And then we added forward ref to make refs work through stacks of composed components. Like I mentioned, props.children callable as a function because it's no longer always an array. Render can now return arrays, which is backed by the logic that we use to implement fragments. We have componented catch, which is basically error boundaries. And that just was a lot easier in the current diff implementation. And the end result is that Preact compat will still exist. It's actually going to be called Preact/compat. It's going to be in core now. But it's pretty much just going to export what you see here. You get pure component. We didn't bother putting it in core just because there's so many different ways of doing this now. We didn't want to make sure everyone was paying that cost. You get the children API. We still didn't feel that this was worth pulling into core, but we wanted to have a simple way for people to access it. Create portal and find DOM node just for for various usages of React. Find DOM node may eventually find its way into the ether, but for now it's going to be there. Yeah, so that's basically all Preact compat is now. And if you consider before it was a 3 kilobyte library on top of a 3 kilobyte library, I don't know how exactly the byte size now, but it's nowhere near what it was. Most of it is just a little bit of fluff on top of the main library. So this is all going to ship to Preact's like actually out in the open repo on March 4th. This is the first time we have announced a date. I want to say tentative. We are going to hold ourselves to this. So the code will be available. It will be browsable. Yeah, famous last words. The code will be available on March 4th. That we can guarantee. We will inevitably also ship this at least as an alpha by then. I really hope that it's more than that. I hope it's a beta. But regardless of how that actually ends up playing itself out, this will be something that people can go and use on March 4th, which is pretty exciting. But before then, possibly this week, possibly next week, who knows? We're going to ship something called Preact 9. And I will say 50% of the reason why there is a Preact 9 is because we didn't want to go from 8 to 10, but we really wanted to use X since we've been throwing that around. So we needed to have a release in between. And as it turned out, it was also useful for us to get two things out that need to be released probably prior to X. So the first is hooks. As I mentioned, we have a lot of implementations of them, and one of them was on top of Preact 8. So it didn't require the re-architecture stuff. We're just going to ship that in Preact 9 so people can start using hooks. And then the second one is this new vnode shape. So the the renamed properties. That's going to be a bit of a rough transition. We have code mods for people, but there's cases where, like, if people have built their own Preact plugins or custom renderers, you will have to rename all the properties yourself. So we're going to ship that in 9 and sort of isolate it as like, this is one thing that you are dealing with. And then when X comes around, you don't have to worry about that. 9 to X will be a very minimal set of breaking changes. So we're sort of keeping it stepwise for folks. Okay, so post March 4th, what happens? We just have a lot of ecosystem work and next generation moving forward stuff to do. So the biggest one is Preact CLI at Next. This has been stable for a ridiculously long time, but we've been waiting on like a couple of moonshot PRs. One of the things that we need to do in order to get this out is to have Preact CLI itself support Preact X. So we don't want to have people have to upgrade them both at the same time. Once that's in, we're just going to cut this over. It'll be Preact CLI version 3. Ships with a bunch of new things. Obviously, Webpack 4 getting on the bandwagon. It does differential JavaScript serving, which is nice and everyone should be doing. So Preact CLI is now doing. Automatically inlines your critical CSS, and this is for any of the routes you have in your pre-render config. There's a new simpler config format that can be used based on JSON, which is really nice. And it's just generally faster, and we've switched to Workbox for service workers. On the ecosystem side, there's a bunch of stuff that has to get updated in order to account for the changes in Preact X, most specifically the breaking changes in the vnode shape. Some of them are here. And then beyond that, we're just going to be looking at compiler optimizations, similar to what Evan was talking about, supporting things like HTML as a first-class option for writing your, what would be JSX views. And then we've been looking into official solutions for doing server-side rendering. So the next JSs of the world and their ilk, how those play in the Preact landscape. That's pretty much it.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jason. That was awesome. Bonnie, do you have any questions?
Yes. Who did your slides, Jason?
Me.
I love them. You get bonus points. Your slides are as my daughter would say, the bomb.com.
Oh, I made them this morning. Thank you.
I like it.
I have a question for Jason.
Yeah.
I'm scared.
No, it's just you said you mentioned differential JavaScript loading, so like module, no module. What are you using for no module? Are you using System.js or are you using Webpacks?
Still definitely using Webpack. Yeah.
Okay. So Webpack has a I guess you just output modules with Webpack and then you output no modules with Webpack and just like put something in your HTML to say.
Common misconception.
Okay.
Differential serving, sort of the baseline requirement for it, actually doesn't use native JavaScript modules at all. All it does is it uses script type module to opt into the better parsing strategy in V8 and other engines. Okay. So you're actually still running Webpack code in both cases and not using ES modules in both cases. You just forked it. So the ES modules one, this is the key. If you have script type module and that loads in a browser, it means that you can use things like classes. Yeah. So you can automatically set your transpile target to support those things. So there's a plugin, I think it was actually by Preact, who is the person who's been working on this in Preact CLI. Chris is messaging me. It's very possible that he's going to correct me here, but there is a plugin that basically says like, oh, you're doing module, no module. Well, we have this set of Babel rules that will compile to like a good module target. So it knows that you can take advantage of classes, but you don't have access to class properties. So that's sort of how that works. And then your no module version is just the fully down-leveled ES5.
Cool. So Webpack output in both cases, but just like a higher, better JavaScript for the module case. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
So, Jason, we're just wondering, somebody on chat was wondering, well, actually, they said ceviche for all on March 4th. So we're all hoping to celebrate and eat ceviche, guys.
I do not have a fish allergy, by the way. I do love ceviche. I have no idea why that ended up being the repo name. I'm technically to blame for it, but I don't remember.
I love it. I love it when people don't take themselves too seriously, and we can all have this. Speaking of the chat, who's Chris? There's someone named Chris who's very excited about you. Who's Chris?
Chris with a K?
Chris with a C.
Oh.
Do you just have a random fan?
I don't know. How do I access the chat?
You don't. Well, the problem is you don't know who it is because it's just Chris. Chris can tell us who he is.
There's no last name.
I mean, I know a lot of Chris's.
Well, say hello to Chris because there's a Chris watching who's excited to see you.
Okay.
Jason, is it? So does Chris Baxter also work on AMP? Or not? Sorry, not AMP. Preact. I get everything mixed up.
Chris does work on AMP.
I know Chris Baxter works on AMP, but does Chris Baxter work on Preact too? Or?
So this is actually why it's difficult for me to write that slide with all the names. there are a lot of people who help steer Preact and a lot of people who help us make the ridiculously annoying decisions we have to make. So while I would like for it to be as easy as to just like pull a list of contributors, that list is so much smaller than the actual team of people who are making all of these things happen behind the scenes. So yes, Chris works on Preact. But
I guess when you said Chris with a K, I think Chris Baxter, but
yeah,
Christopher Baxter. Were you thinking the same thing, or is it a different one?
Yeah, I was thinking of Chris Baxter.
Okay, so see, I wasn't so crazy. All right, so next up, we're so excited to have Kenneth joining us for the very first time on to give us a state of Ember update. And Kenneth is on the Ember learning team. So Ember is where I first started, so I'm always happy to see updates on what's going on. So Kenneth, I'll let you take it away from here.
Sure, thank you. I'll just share my screen real quick. And yeah, there we go. Can you all see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Yeah, so my name is Kenneth. I'm a lead front-end developer at Linkfire, also a member of the Learning Core team. I'm based in Copenhagen, Denmark. So let's start.
Lost your slides unless you're showing a black screen.
I'm not showing a black screen.
Okay. We saw your slides. I think when you pressed present all, yeah, there we go. So for some reason, when you said press present all, it went to a black screen.
Okay, well, that's super annoying.
Okay, we can see it like this. This is great.
Okay, sure. Let's do it like this. Then yeah. So a few announcements. Yesterday, there was a release of an official Ember.js documentary made by Honeypot. So you can totally go and watch that on YouTube. Just search for Ember documentary. It's a nice look at the history of Ember and a bit a view into the community surrounding Ember. It's really nice. And then we have EmberConf coming up in March. So be sure to go and get tickets for that on the website, emberconf.com. And since Amy was on the last time from the learning team, there's been a release of 2 versions, Ember 3.6 and 3.7. So just briefly go through the changes in these versions. So in 3.6, as always, there's the release post that you should check out on Ember.js.com. But some of the exciting things are the updates for the native class constructor RFC. So the last part has been shipped in 3.6, which means that the behavior of native classes is now stable, but Ember doesn't currently support or recommend the uses of class fields or decorators since they're still under the TC39 process. So be sure to check the release post regarding this if this is something that excites you. In 3.6, there's also the final stage of the router service RFC, which is really cool. If you want to work a bit more with the router in your application, it provides a lot of some new APIs that makes this a lot easier for you to work with, but also so we finally can deprecate some of the old stuff. Then in 3.7, there's the release post as well that you definitely should check out. And there's only a few things in 3.7, so it mainly contains bug fixes, and there is an explicit drop for dropping of support for Node 4. And for Ember Data, there's bug fixes as well. For the Ember CLI, there is a small addition to the generated documentation in Ember add-ons. So now it auto-generates a section that communicates to the users of your add-on which version of Ember and Ember CLI is recommended to use this this add-on. And then they have removed the last usage of Babel 6. Ember 3.8 is scheduled for release next week. So be sure to keep an eye on the Ember.js blog for the release post sometime next week. And for something extremely exciting, there is a lot of work on Ember Octane. Now I know Amy went through this the last time, but I sort of want to re-mention it since there is a preview upcoming for this. So Ember Octane is the first edition in the Ember community. So an edition is a new type of release. It's sort of a coherence point. So Ember Octane is not Ember 4 or Ember 5 or Ember 3 point something. It's basically a point in time where a certain set of features are released and stable and ready to use. So I've listed some of the features here that that is going to be part of Octane. So some of this is already released and some of it will be released later on. The main focus of Ember Octane is a focus on productivity and performance. So there is a preview upcoming for this, and you can find out when it will arrive by keeping in touch with the Ember community, either by following the Ember Times, which is a weekly newsletter covering all things Ember related. You can either follow it on Twitter at Ember Times, subscribe to the newsletter, or read it on the blog on Ember.js.com. You can also come and hang out in the Discord chat. It's very friendly and helpful, and it's a good way to get involved with the community. You can find an invite link for Discord on the Ember.js website. And of course, you can always visit the forum at discuss.ember.js.com. So thanks.
Thank you so much for that. That was such an awesome update. Bonnie, you have any questions?
I don't have questions, but I was pretty tickled about that forum, because it's so great to be where people can go and ask specific questions. So that's great, and you can find that link from the Ember.js blog.
So the forums is on discuss.ember.js.com, and the forum is of course powered by Ember.
Cool, awesome. Love it. Always love my little Tomster too. Love little Tomster. So if anybody wants to see the best logo ever, sorry, other JavaScript people, but the best logo ever in the JavaScript ecosystem, it's definitely the Tomster, and Zoe, of course. But okay, so next up, we're going to go ahead and have Justin, and Justin is going to give us a state of Polymer/web components. Hey, Justin.
All right. Hello there. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
And am I also presenting?
Yes, you are.
Yay. I love it when it works. Oops, that's not the right one. Okay. And am I full screen?
Yes, you are.
Okay. So yeah, my name is Justin, and I work at Google on web components and Polymer and things like lit-HTML. So I'm going to give an update on the state of kind of web components in general, and then drill into some stuff that we're working on. So the first thing is that since I think anybody's done an update on this show, that we've had a lot of releases, both in the Polymer project and other places in the community. So a big one was Salesforce, I think about a month ago or so, released their Lightning web components. So they're moving their entire client-side SDK away from like a custom framework type of solution over to basically pure web components with some carve-outs for coordinating them with the Salesforce platform. So this is a really big deal because web components have seen a lot of adoption in enterprise already, and Salesforce brings with it something like 4 million developers on their platform. So that's a huge deal for web components in general. Similarly, Ionic has just released Ionic v4, which is a rewrite of all their libraries and components to be more framework agnostic. So they're using their own stencil web components compiler to create all the Ionic components in there. And so that just got released recently. And then on our projects, last week we just released the first stable versions of Lit Element and Lit HTML, which is our next generation libraries from the Polymer group. So it's been an eventful few months there. I want to dive in a little bit into what we've done with Lit HTML and Lit Element. So Lit HTML went 1.0 for the first version. Lit Element went 2.0 only because we acquired the package name from somebody and they had already done a 1.0. So we just started with 2.0 there. For those who aren't familiar, Lit HTML is a new-ish HTML templating engine where you write your templates in JavaScript using template literals. And we render and update them very efficiently, only updating the parts that change. But we don't use a VDOM or do any diffing, which typically have overhead to do that extra memory allocation for the VDOM and the tree walks and diffing of the VDOM trees. It's really small. It's 3.1K right now if you bundle the modules and minify and compress them. It's really fast. It's on some of the benchmarks out there, it's basically clocking in around where Inferno does, or faster in some cases if you have more complex templates. And it's also written as pure, basically ES 2017, and we distribute it as modules. So you can use it in modern browsers with no build steps at all. And the feedback we've been getting has been really, really great, even from people in other frameworks. The author of D3 built a library very similar, inspired by it. We've had people from Angular and React communities say that they like it a lot. Michael Jackson here even took a break from complaining about web components to say that HTML was awesome. So it has struck a little bit of a nerve with people, or a positive nerve, that it's been a good ergonomic shape for people. So to show real quick, if people haven't seen it, what it looks like, we have this HTML template tag, and you're able to put some HTML in there and then put some expressions. And one of the reasons why this kind of syntax works really well for writing HTML in JavaScript, especially templated HTML, is because you can see from the syntax the dynamic and the static portions. Like in this example right here, this binding right here is the only dynamic part of the template. So we don't use a VDOM and we don't walk the tree. We just remember exactly where that dynamic portion is and update it directly. And this is why we can save a lot of work versus VDOM libraries. Lit HTML recently, before its release, gained some new syntax to be able to control how bindings are implemented. So we have a few different types of bindings. You can bind to text in the middle of a text span inside of DOM. You can bind to an attribute with just this attribute expression. You can also bind to properties. There's a lot of kind of FUD out there about web components that they can only handle strings because they can only handle attributes. This FUD is wrong, and all it requires is some way of setting a property on an element, which is just a JavaScript object. So Lit HTML gives you very convenient syntax for doing that. And we can also bind to any event using @EventListener. And we do this with the @syntax. I think Vue has something similar here. But as opposed to using event properties like React does, we have to do like onClick equals something, and that element has to have that event property. Here we use @EventListener, so you can use any kind of bubbling or capturing event that doesn't even have an event property, like custom elements might fire just their own events. And then we also have a convenient syntax for doing Boolean attribute binding. So some attributes need to be removed when their value is falsy, and this will do that for you automatically. So that's Lit HTML. One interesting thing that has happened with Lit HTML is the Stacklets team has been working on a Lit HTML template. So if you fork from the template is just named Lit HTML. This template's really interesting because it takes advantage of the fact that you don't have to do any build for Lit HTML. So typically Stacklets has to compile with Babel or Webpack or something. This template doesn't compile at all. It just reloads instantly. And so you can see that we're able to do full page reloads on every keystroke, which is something you wouldn't normally be able to kind of do with a framework that requires a build step. And in here, you can start typing. And on every keystroke, we're doing a full page reload right here. And because there's no build, it's basically instant. So we can get hot module reloading kind of behavior, but without some of the kind of pitfalls of hot module reloading in there. So that's been really nice. Let's see, let's go back. Yeah, so lit.html is just a templating library. It only handles rendering DOM and data. And for components, it doesn't have any component model. We leave this up to web components. And so here, we released lit element 2.0 also. This is a very lightweight base class for web components. It's only about 2 KB on top of lit.html. Obviously uses lit.html for rendering. And on top of that, it gives you reactive declarative properties. So you can say which properties you want to trigger rendering. And then it feeds those through an asynchronous rendering pipeline so that we get batching and a lot of nice behaviors from being able to control rendering and make it non-synchronous. And then it uses Shadow DOM for styling, which I will always try to tell everybody who will listen that Shadow DOM fixes CSS. I'll go into that a little more in a second. So lit element, in a way, it looks a lot kind of like React, except for without JSX. So we're just using standard syntax usually. I show an example here with decorators because I'm kind of being optimistic and hoping that decorators will advance pretty soon, but you can also do the same thing here without decorators. So here we have a simple class that extends lit element. Oops, let me go back. Extends lit element, declares a property, and when this property is changed, this writes a getter and a setter, it'll cause the render to happen. And the render is just a pure functional method that returns a lit.html expression that has some HTML and a binding in it. And then we let you declare your styles kind of separately here because we will automatically add those efficiently to your shadow root, like I'll show later. So, whoops. That we just released as well. And combined, we have some pretty encouraging adoption announcements that have happened from companies. So even though these have been pre-released, we've seen especially enterprises like SAP, ING, British Gas, especially these enterprises that have design systems and existing projects where they want to be able to launch the design system so that it works across Angular and Ember and React. There seem to be getting some uptake there, and that's been really great. Next, I want to talk about the platform itself because we always try to encourage and give feedback into new specifications that will help components. The first one is Chrome 73 is going to ship with 2 really great features for web components. The first one is constructible style sheets. I have a link here. Jason just wrote a great kind of explainer tutorial article on constructible style sheets. So these are basically just a way to create a style sheet once. You can actually call new style sheet, and then you can give it some CSS text. And so this style sheet is created once, it's parsed once, but then after that, for every component that wants to use the style sheet, you can add it to the shadow DOM for that component. And this is just a JavaScript reference to it, to this single shared style sheet. And because you avoid reparsing or trying to look up style sheets by Chrome and Safari do this thing where if you put multiple style sheets in different shadow roots, it'll try to deduplicate them. So that's a nice optimization, but that even has some performance overhead. So constructible style sheets give a nice boost. We've seen from the Chrome team up to 30% improvement in some benchmarks. So this makes web components quite a bit faster. And you get some interesting features where because you have a bunch of shadow roots sharing a style sheet, if you mutate this style sheet, those changes will affect all of your components at once, even though they're in their encapsulated shadow roots. And that static styles that lit element has, I showed earlier, we use that to automatically create constructible style sheets on browsers that support it. So sites that use lit element will just get a lot faster on Chrome 73. Yeah, here's just the same example, and I just wanted to point out right here, what we do is this CSS tag detects whether or not you have constructible style sheets, and if you do, it just creates a style sheet out of this text. And if not, it's just going to inject a plain style tag into the shadow root. The next great thing with Chrome 73 is the addition of what we call CSS shadow parts, or : part. So the idea here is that Shadow DOM gives you style encapsulation, and sometimes you want to be able to explicitly expose something out of that shadow root for styling purposes. So what you do is you add this new part attribute to elements that are inside of a shadow root. And so here the H1 is going to have a part header, and this section is going to have a part main. And then outside of this shadow root, just like pseudo elements, you're able to select a part with a CSS selector here called : part. And then now we can color the header and make it red, and we can color this main section here and make it blue. So that's really important for theming in an encapsulated style world. And I wanted to point out that part is kind of this march down this progression of enabling developers to do things that previously only the platform could do. So if you look at everything that native elements can do, the story of web components is kind of exposing those features to developers. So the platform has been able to make elements. Web components say you should make, you can make elements with custom elements. The platform has had shadow roots, and that's how they have implemented things like input that have extra kind of Chrome in there, date pickers and stuff. And so Shadow DOM exposes that to developers. And if you think about what's left, pseudo elements are necessary for the platform, things like : placeholder, and : part here lets developers do that as well. And then next up, we're going to have things like allowing you to do custom pseudo classes. And that will kind of complete the story here on Shadow DOM and at least let people kind of be able to do everything that the platform can too. Finally, I wanted to drop in one little note about usage. We've been looking at the stats on chromestatus.com recently, and web components are, sometimes people say like not enough people are using web components, but they've actually been quietly kind of an enormous success. Almost 10% of page views in Chrome use web components, custom elements or Shadow DOM. So this is kind of quietly one of the most successful platform features that have been launched in recent years. This has been more successful than web workers or service workers, I believe, or web audio, things like that. So pretty much every web user probably uses web components every single day that they browse the web. And so we're seeing this go up over time, especially right now. So this is encouraging for web components use. Finally, I want to talk about what's up next on each of these different areas here very briefly. So for lit.html, we don't support SSR yet. We wanted to get the client-side 1.0 release out first. So we're working on this now. We're working on streaming SSR, so each static and dynamic chunk of lit.html can be streamed independently as they're kind of resolved. And we're going to work on incremental rehydration, so you'll be able to tell lit.html to rehydrate specific portions of the page. And we have some ideas for doing build time optimizations that will decrease boot up time even further. Lit element, we added constructible style sheet support. We're going to add : part support with a fallback similarly. We also want to be able to build out the decorators at build time, compile them out to reduce boot up cost as well, so we don't do any runtime metaprogramming. And then once we have SSR for lit.html, we need to add that to lit element. And we have a bunch of async helpers that are kind of in the queue. I gave a talk at Chrome Dev Summit about how to do kind of lazy and async rendering like you might see with React and Suspense, and how to do that just kind of with events and async await and kind of just native JavaScript and platform features. And so we're going to be rolling some of those out. On the native platform side of things, the template instantiation proposal is kind of moving forward, and this is an idea that you should be able to parameterize a template with some bindings and then programmatically go in and update those dynamic spots. This is kind of what lit.html does. So this is kind of the first way that the platform is going to have an opinion on how do you create a bunch of DOM and update it efficiently. : theme is a way to do something similar to : part, but crosses any number of shadow boundaries down the tree, so you'll be able to theme a whole page or a whole subtree with a style sheet. And then HTML modules. So we used to have HTML imports, which was a way you could import a fragment of HTML. And in our case, we use that to define components. That didn't get uptake by other browsers, but HTML modules is kind of a re-envisioning of that idea that uses the JavaScript module loading system. And Microsoft has taken up this idea and made a specific proposal for it, and they have changes rolling into Chromium, or proposed for Chromium now that implement HTML modules. So that's going to be really great to see. I hope we can take advantage of that in the future, and I hope it'll be great for things like Vue as well. And then kind of in that same vein, we've proposed this idea of CSS modules where you can just import CSS into JavaScript and have that work natively in the platform there. So hopefully that moves forward along with HTML modules. And then finally, we have on deck soon a lot of work we want to do around polyfills. We want to make them easier to use and to transparently implement the specs more accurately. We think this is one of the biggest roadblocks to web components adoption, and so we want to kind of invest in everything we can into making these easier to use. And that is my update there. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justin. That was so great. We're all talking in the chat being like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. So really, really exciting to see a bunch of the updates, not only from Polymer, but also for web components. Bonnie, I'll let you lead with questions.
Yeah, so I really have not been keeping up with lit HTML because I've been pretty focused on Angular, but I'm really loving the part and the lit HTML in general. But I was getting super distracted because of the red zippy thing on your screen. It was fascinating. I love it so much. I need that in my life. So yeah, so I really like that. I wanted to ask you, for people that have not been keeping up with lit HTML and they wanted to like get in on from the beginning, where is the best resource for them to go to like get a crash course, like everything you need to know in all at once?
Yes, so we have a new microsite up. We've kind of been dividing the Polymer documentations into kind of separate microsites and focusing more on the Polymer project as opposed to the Polymer library. So if you go to lit-html.polymer-project.org, you will get to the lit HTML microsite, which gets you up and running. And it's very easy to get going, again, because there's no build step. You can use it very easily in StackBlitz or other online code editors. It loads great from unpackaged.com, so you can get going very easily there.
Okay. Lit, can you say that one more time?
So I have it in the slide deck too. Let me go back to it.
lit-element.polymerproject.org. I'm going to put that in the chat, and then Tracy, if you can transfer it over to the other chat so that is that right?
Yeah, well, we have two sites. We have, if you can see here, we have lit-html.polymerproject.org, and then we have lit-element.polymerproject.org.
So for beginners, you think lit HTML would be a good place to start?
It depends on what you're trying to do. Lit HTML is not, it doesn't have a component system, right? It's just templating. So if you're trying to look for something that would be comparable to React or Angular or Ember, then I would go for lit element. But one of the reasons why we divided this up is because a lot of people have been using lit HTML in their own project, independently of any other existing component system. And so we wanted people to be able to adopt just this focused library that just lets them create and update DOM. But I think for most people, they probably want to start with lit element.
Well, it looks really cool. I have not been paying attention, but now I will be paying attention after this, and I'm going to have to go check it out. And I have to say this, Tracy, because this is the first time I've been on this show. I love the chat because, you know, as we get to the end of the show, we don't really always have time for all of the questions in the chat, but people are asking, and then other people in the chat are answering the questions in the chat before we even get to them. So I love that. So yeah, so Westbrook Johnson, good save there, because we were running out of time, and then there were questions, and then there were answers. It was like, this is great. Okay, and okay, I know we're out of time, but one more question. How did you do the red whizzy thing? I love it.
It's in slides. It's just a button. If you scroll over, there's like the pointer. You never get to use it if you're using slides on a.
It's not Pixelbook. It's actually Google Slides.
Yeah, it's in Google Slides. If you just hover down at the bottom when you're presenting, it'll let you choose it.
I can't believe I've never seen that before. I love it. Yeah, that was a great presentation.
Thanks.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining. Thank you to our presenters. Once again, you can continue the conversation on Twitter at this.media. I've posted all the links to all the speakers there as well. So feel free to come hang out, chat. All these open source libraries wouldn't be there without the different collaborators. So if you get excited about open source, feel free to submit a PR, even if it's for documentation. We're very, very, very excited about those. My name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyElite, and then you can follow Bonnie. Thank you so much, Bonnie, for being our special invited guest. You can follow her at Bonster75 on Twitter. Cool, awesome, very, very good. Okay, and we will see you for the next This.JavaScript. Thank you.